นะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนะมัสสามิ Blessings, good evening. When I was a young monk, some people would come to me with the question, perhaps the most commonly asked question was, why did you become a monk? And often people would assume things. They'd say, oh, you're young, surely you haven't had much suffering. Why do you have to be a monk? Because they assume that if you become a Buddhist monk, it's because you're suffering or had some extreme suffering, so you need to be a monk to sort it out. Or one lady came to the monastery. She was a representative of another religion, and in those days there were a lot of missionaries in Thailand, northeast Thailand. And she saw me and stormed up to me and said, "You're not suffering, why did you become a monk?" So some people assumed I was a monk because I was suffering. Some people assumed I was a monk because I wasn't suffering. I actually became a monk, I think, primarily because I had faith in the Buddha as a wise teacher. Because I began practicing Buddhism from books, reading books, either suttas or commentaries and explanations of what the Buddha taught. And I just found that everything the Buddha said made very clear, good sense. And even though I had plenty of questions coming up as I read about the Buddhist teachings, the Buddha seemed to have an answer for everything, which only gave me more confidence and more faith in the Buddha as a teacher. It was when I started practicing meditation, which wasn't long after I began reading about Buddhism, but when I began practicing meditation, then I did start to notice more about suffering, what it was, because you read the explanation the Buddha gave about suffering, and you get that from the paper, from the page. Different kinds of suffering we have: physical suffering, mental suffering, the suffering of change, the suffering of not getting what you want, all of these different kinds of suffering. I knew the descriptions, but then when I started practicing meditation, trying to work with my mind, bring up mindfulness, then suffering as an experience became more obvious. And I realized even though I didn't have much suffering or any extreme suffering as a young person, I did have some suffering that I could quickly recognize. Because like anyone else, my mind was not particularly peaceful. It's always falling into different moods, getting caught up into different trains of thought, some of them which were more stressful than others. And I also had some physical suffering. There's just the suffering of being in one posture too long, walking too long, or sitting too long, standing too long. You get tired. You get pain, and then obviously sometimes I would get ill, or if I was in Thailand, I'd get mosquito bite me, or stomach ache, or something. Very quickly I realized that even if you're in a reasonably good situation and healthy, you still have suffering, different kinds of suffering to endure. So as I began practicing meditation, what the Buddha pointed out became more apparent in my experience, and I started to notice things. But I also noticed that sometimes I did suffer in life, but sometimes I didn't have much suffering. It's not certain. So I couldn't make a kind of fixed statement like these people who were coming to tell me why I ordained as a Buddhist monk had done. I couldn't say, "Oh, my life is all suffering," or "My life is not suffering." I couldn't say that, because I realized that our experience of life is kind of like an ongoing, continuous process of experience. Sometimes there's pain, sometimes not. Sometimes you feel more at peace, at ease, happy in yourself, and sometimes not. It's never never one thing. Then I met Ajahn Chah, read his teachings, heard his teachings. And one of the things I always was struck by from Ajahn Chah was he saying, once you start contemplating your experience, you practice a bit of mindfulness, learn to pay attention to your own experience as a human being. Even though you do notice sometimes you have physical pain or mental stress, suffering come up, it becomes interesting when you make it the object of your awareness. When you're trying to learn from it and understand it, it actually becomes interesting. Even suffering can become interesting. And in that sense, it's not so much suffering anymore, it's just an object of mind that you're learning about, learning from. Where does it come from? How does it arise? How does it pass away? Even suffering can be quite interesting and can give you things, can give you knowledge, understanding. You can even get peace from suffering once you understand it. But what I found, in line with perhaps with what Ajahn Chah taught, was that you have to view suffering like the Buddha viewed it. You have to really know suffering with mindfulness with mindfulness and then with contemplation, insight, to really fully penetrate suffering and see it for what it is, and to make it interesting and to make it something that you don't have to cling to and just be a victim of, say. It's something you can learn from and know about. You really have to practice. You really have to make suffering in all its forms the object of your awareness. It's something you have to study and learn about. And I noticed myself, I didn't really have in the beginning, like anyone else, I didn't want to know about suffering or make suffering the center of my attention and make it something that I have to look at and understand. Most of us come into the world and we automatically don't want suffering and try to run away from it, get away from it, distract ourselves from it. But Ajahn Chah and his teachings and his way of practice is very good at getting people to face up to some of their suffering. Because he knew from his own experience, that's the only way you can get beyond it, is by facing it, understanding it. When you're a young monk, or even a lay practitioner, I think much the same, you always think, if I'm going to get beyond suffering, I've got to find the right place, the right teacher, the right temple, or the right meditation center, or the right country. Nowadays, we even move countries in pursuit of happiness and pursuit of the Dhamma. We even travel around the globe. But like many other people, I used to think, you have to go to the right place, then I'll be able to meditate. When I find the right place that's peaceful and the conditions are right, the temperature is right, the food is right, not too much disturbance, not too much sounds, and not too many people bothering me, then I'll be able to meditate, and then I'll be able to understand suffering. But I didn't see, like so many other practitioners, so much the actual drive for that, the desire to find the good place, the right place to practice. And another teaching Ajahn Chah gave over and over again was, the right place to practice, or the proper place to practice, is in your own heart. It's not out there. It's not a physical location. It's not another monastery or another mountain or forest or another country. It's your own heart. And the way to find that is you have to go inwards rather than outwards and move around. You have to go inwards and bring stillness and pay attention to what's going on in your own heart to understand it. So I'd hear that teaching over and over again, go inwards. In Thailand they use the word opanayiko all the time. Opanayiko, bring it in, bring your attention inwards. Bring the Dhamma into your heart, or bring your heart to the Dhamma, rather than looking externally to get the right conditions, the right place to get knowledge and so on. But more look to your heart to provide knowledge and provide the place of Dhamma, the understanding of Dhamma. That seemed to be very in line with what the Buddha taught. Like most people, when I began reading about Buddhism, I like to read the Dhammapada, and so that very powerful verse, Mano Puvangama Dhamma Mano Seta Mano Maya. The mind is the forerunner of everything. The mind is the leader, the mind is the chief. The mind or the heart, sometimes we use the word interchangeably. We say citta, which means that the quality of knowing, but you can say that's the heart or you can say it's the mind. But that's the leader of everything in our life. Our experience of suffering, if we have suffering, where does it come from? Well, ultimately it comes from this mind, doesn't it? We create suffering through our delusions. Because there's delusion and ignorance, we attach, we create ideas and desires, and we attach. But that's all going on in our own mind, our own heart. So the more I heard Ajahn Chah's teachings, and then the more I practiced meditation, the more I realized how wrong I was half the time, just endlessly seeking happiness and peace outside of myself, going to places. As a young monk, you don't have money to travel, and it's not really appropriate to travel all over the world, but you still try and move around in your life to find places to practice and meditate. So if you're in a forest monastery, which is where I used to live, where you find different places in the forest, the best spot in the forest to meditate. I spent a lot of time in one large monastery, an island in the middle of a reservoir, which had about 1,500 acres of forest, very good quality forest full of animals, and it's a very suitable place to practice. Ajahn Chah used to say it was his favourite place. So I stayed there both as an anagarika in white, and then as a novice monk, and then as a monk for periods of time. And I spent my time moving around the forest to find the best place to meditate. So I'd have an umbrella and a mosquito net and a mat. And, I'd spend a week or two in this part of the forest, and then I'd move on to another part, and then another part. And I got to know this large forest quite well, but I also realized I'm always moving places. Sometimes there'd be a reason, because the conditions were not right. Like sometimes I'd put my mat down in a place, start meditating, set up my camp there, and then during the middle of the night, ants would come up and start biting me, so I'd have to move. Or another place I moved to, I set up my umbrella and my mosquito net, and I was sitting there meditating, and then a whole troop of monkeys came and they camped out on the tree above where I was camping, and they spent their time playing with my umbrella and my mosquito net and just trying to annoy me, it seemed, because they were mischievous. So then I moved down to the water's edge, because it was an island. I could camp in the forest right next to the water. I thought, this is nice. There's the water here. It's cool, beautiful at night. When there was a full moon, it was very beautiful. But then there were also a lot of fishermen, and the fishermen had their canoes with little motor motors on the end of them, so they could get quite noisy and disturbing. So I was forever moving around. Then I tried moving into a hut. They had a few huts in the forest, but they were very hot, so the huts were too hot. Then I moved into one hut and the floor gave way because the termites were eating it. Then I moved to another hut and the ceiling was full of scorpions, and scorpions kept dropping down on me, so I had to move from that. So I must have moved at least a dozen times in this one forest until I sort of thought, I'm getting really fed up with moving everywhere, trying to find the right place to meditate. But as I did it, I learned a few things. I learned, well, everywhere you go, you take this body and mind with you, don't you? And life is like this. We spend so much time moving to get away from suffering that we don't really see or know or understand truly what suffering is. But Ajahn Chah's encouragement was always know yourself, know this body, know this mind, what we call the five khandhas, body, feelings, memories, thought formations, this word sankhara, and consciousness, sense consciousness. You have to know these things for what they are. We call them conditions, things that arise and pass away due to causes and conditions. It's probably the clearest insight most people have, first of all. It's just this body and mind is never the same. It's never stable, fixed. And that is part of our suffering. And why do we have to move posture all the time, change posture? It's because you stay in one posture, whether it's sitting, lying down, standing or walking. After a while, it gets painful, so you have to change posture. If you're walking, you have to stop. If you're standing, you have to sit down. If you're sitting, you have to lie down. And if you're lying down too long, you have to get up again. And that's going on every day. That's part of the human condition, isn't it? You have to change posture, otherwise you start getting bed sores and other kinds of physical pain and discomfort. But we don't really see it as dukkha, as suffering, until we start training our mind to look with the mind of wisdom, to contemplate with mindfulness, with insight. We tend just to react. So we're sitting somewhere and it's too hot, so we say, get up and go and turn on the aircon or move to somewhere cooler. Or we're sitting somewhere it's too cold, and we get up, we have to put clothes on or turn the heating on. Life is a succession of movements to escape from suffering, but never really knowing suffering. And the same with so much else, isn't it? With people, with jobs and works and careers, the place we live, the place we work and so on. You're constantly moving to get away from suffering, but we don't see why or what's going on so clearly because the moving hides it, doesn't it? Gives you something to focus on, so you don't have to think about the suffering or be aware of it. You can just run away from it, move away. If you can't physically move away, then we move away with our mind, with our attention. So we have all the technology now to keep our mind occupied so we don't have to notice suffering. And if it's your mental state, you're feeling down, whether you look for something to distract you from this feeling of depression, disappointment, sadness, anger, whatever it is, you look for something to take your mind off it. You eat the food that you like, you look at something online, you do something with the technology to take your mind away from itself. So even if physically you're not moving, mentally you're still moving to get away from suffering. And this is why Ajahn Chah was so good at getting people to understand better what's going on, because he wouldn't let people do that. In those days, there weren't mobile phones and computers, but he made people sit when it was hot, or sit when they were tired, or meditate when they wanted to sleep, or wait for their food when they wanted to eat, or wait for their drink when they wanted to have a drink. There's a lot of waiting in Ajahn Chah's monastery, waiting, not knowing sometimes, you not knowing whether you're going on some trip somewhere, some Sangha business, to go and visit another monastery or something. You'd have to wait and you wouldn't be sure. And then sometimes he'd give you no time at all, no warning, no forewarning, and say, get your things together, we're off. Or he'd tell you you're going somewhere, but then make you wait for many days before you go. You don't even know, you may even give up wanting to go somewhere. But this was all as a way to get you to see your mind or know your mind and see these movements of mind based on desire. I even had one friend who wanted to become a monk. He came to live with Ajahn Chah and said, I picked Ajahn Chah, he's such a good teacher. All the meditation masters in Thailand said, he's a good teacher, I should ordain as a monk with him. So this young man came to his monastery and stayed there, and when you begin your training, you wear white, keep the 8 precepts. And he waited, and sometimes Ajahn Chah would ordain other people, but not this person. He's just waiting, weeks, and weeks turned into months. And sometimes people who had arrived in the monastery after him already had ordained, and he hadn't. So he thought, oh, this is not working. Maybe Ajahn Chah doesn't like me, or there's something wrong. So after many months of waiting, he made a plan. He said, that's it. If I don't ordain tomorrow, I'm going to leave. It's just, I don't want to wait anymore. I think Ajahn Chah's forgotten all about me. And then that morning, Ajahn Chah said, oh, get your things together, you're ordaining today. As if he'd read his mind. Perhaps he had read his mind. But he pushed him to the limit where he wanted to leave the monastery, but he didn't. He obviously stuck it out to the point where he did ordain. And Ajahn Chah was very good at that, getting people to wait so that they could look at their mind, and not look in the sense of theorizing or just thinking about it, but actually knowing how they felt, what thoughts, what moods were coming up. Leading people to practice vipassana without them even trying, or without them even sort of saying, I am practicing vipassana. He just use the natural conditions and natural situations to get them to see their own desires and how they're often frustrated by him, so that they become very obvious as a cause of suffering. And that's the important thing, is once you feel suffering or stress, the way of the Buddha is to look and observe what's causing this, where is it coming from, or what's the nature of it. A lot of our suffering is just a feeling of discomfort, and the feeling is there for a while, so it's not that there's nothing there, but then you observe it arising and then it may change. Even if you're feeling very frustrated, say in the case of you want to become a monk and the teacher, whether it's Ajahn Chah or another teacher, they haven't yet arranged your ordination or they haven't given you a date. You're just sort of living in the monastery, not sure what's going to happen, when. But still, you might say, oh, I feel really frustrated or disappointed, I haven't ordained as a monk yet. But if you look more closely, what's going on? That feeling is not in the mind or in your experience 24 hours a day. It'll be a feeling that maybe comes up from time to time. If your friend says, when are you going to become a monk? You say, oh, I don't know, I'm so frustrated. Or you yourself start doubting and say, oh, I wonder if he really will ordain me or not. That feeling and whatever the suffering is will be there sometimes, but then there'll be plenty of other times where it completely disappears. But if you're watching and observing, you can see that the nature of feelings, moods, what we call sankharas, is that they're impermanent. They arise, they pass away. If you just follow every desire, of course, you never see that. Because you'll get what you want, and then maybe move on to another desire, and you'll never quite see that each desire, each mental state is a distinct mental state with a start, a finish, it arises, it ceases. But Ajahn Chah was very good at getting people to study that, learn about that. And if you observe more closely, and not just in meditation, although in the formal meditation that's probably the best place to do it, but just in daily life, you observe yourself and what's going on, you'll realize that we're constantly following desires, feeling stress, suffering because of them, but without the eye of the Buddha or the awareness of the Buddha, we never really learn what's going on. We're just constantly moving from one feeling of stress, suffering to another, based on different desires and attachments, but not understanding what's going on. So we keep repeating the same mistakes, as it were. Keep reacting to things. There's different kinds of desire. Obviously, there's the desire to get things you want, what you like, pleasures, successes, ambitions, things you want to be, want to become, want to get, want to have. But then there's also the kinds of desires of wanting to get rid of what you don't want. If you want success, you don't want failure, so you want to get rid of anything failure. So often we don't like to admit our mistakes or our failures. We don't like to talk about them, don't like to think about them, because we want success. We also don't like failure and want to get rid of that or avoid that. We don't like the feeling of lack, so we want food when we're hungry, so we like to think about food and know how to get the food that we want. We don't like feeling hungry, and we don't like feeling like I can't get the food I want. I remember once when I was travelling in Africa as a layman, I hadn't eaten any British food for months, and I was getting skinny. I was with a friend, and we were just sitting around going, how on earth can we get some food that we really are familiar with and like? And then walking down a street, and we saw a shop with a can of Heinz baked beans. we spent the rest of the day, we bought it, and we got really happy just because we found some familiar food. But our mind is like that, isn't it? We have feelings of lack or wanting. I need something, I'm lacking the thing I want. So we're dissatisfied because we haven't got what we want. We may get satisfaction when we get what we want, but it doesn't last very long, and then we're off wanting something else again. So Ajahn Chah was helping us to see our own experience of suffering like in the way of the Buddha. See, suffering is real, but it's not permanent. Even suffering is not permanent, it's changing. But it has its causes, different desires, different kinds of desires and attachments. But it also is something that you can free your mind from when you understand the process more, look at it more closely, understand it better. We can see if I can drop this desire or not identify so strongly with this desire, not give it so much importance in my mind, then the feeling of suffering fades away very quickly. Even if you don't actually get what you want, but you can recognize the problem is not so much getting or not getting what you want, it's more the desire behind it. Behind the wanting, this desire to get something, not wanting. If I can see through that desire, see it as not really me, it's more like a condition of mind, an energy. Partly it's a wrong view, you might say, thinking, if I get this thing then I'll be happy, when you're never completely satisfied even when you get what you want. There's also an energy, it's a movement of mind. When you can really see that, then the stressful part of the desire and the stress it leads to starts to fade, doesn't it? It's just a desire. If you've seen something and really seen it, really know it, penetrated it with some wisdom and insight, when you really know desire, desire is just that. It's just, we say, just that much. It arises, it ceases, it's just that much. You may get what you want or you may not, but the desire is just that much. It's just a movement of mind, a thought, a feeling. It arises, it ceases. You don't have to follow it, you don't have to buy into it. sometimes you follow desires. It's not that to follow desire is evil or bad all the time. But the important thing is to know it, know what's going on, and know how your mind is being affected and how this stress comes up. And then to abandon desire as the cause of stress. I don't want more suffering, more stress. So therefore I will just let this desire be. If you can get to that point, then you're starting to see your mind or know your mind like the Buddha. To know sankharas, know conditions like the Buddha. They are just what they are. They're just conditions of mind, mental states, desires. They arise, they pass away, but not to feed them and not to cling on to them, not to get lost in them. Like that reflection someone was telling me earlier today, is this nice simile that Ajahn Chah gave about the person who goes and sits in the middle of the freeway, the motorway, and then starts complaining that there's too many cars. You go and sit in the middle of a road, a busy road, of course there's going to be cars, and of course you're going to get upset if that's the way you're thinking. If you don't go and sit in the motorway, the freeway, then you're not going to have to suffer. But we do that all the time in life. We keep doing things and then complaining or getting upset, not understanding the process of suffering, not understanding what we're doing. So much of our practice is getting to this point where you can understand suffering, its cause, and then understand how to go beyond it, understanding its cessation, its ending. It's a whole kind of system, a system of reflection, contemplation. But you have to bring your mind to pay attention and learn to do that. Of course, we read about it first, we hear about it, it's a theory that we take on, but you have to actually practice it to really go beyond suffering. It's a practice. And the place of practice is not far away, it's right here, your own mind. This is why monks like me are constantly saying, do your meditation, practice mindfulness, pay attention to your body, your mind, be aware. Because that's the way out of suffering. The only way out of suffering is understanding it, penetrating it, knowing it for what it is. And that takes a lot of time, effort, energy. You need to point your attention, your mental attention, your awareness back to your own self all the time, over and over again. We call this maturing your understanding. It's a word Ajahn Chah used a lot. Sometimes he'd use the word ripening, the same word you use for a fruit ripening on a tree. You're ripening your insight or your wisdom through constant observation, observing what's going on in your experience. Little by little you really get to know it, rather than just believing in things which you haven't really tested as a theory in practice. You're just believing in certain things, accepting certain teachings and views. We have to start like that, but what we really need to do is go into the practice. And that's the hard part. As soon as you start meditating, you get some pain in your leg, or you get a restless state of mind, you say, I can't do this. I'm thinking too much, or my leg hurts too much, or I feel too tired, or it's too hot. Like the last few days in Australia, it's been very hot. So people will say, I can't meditate, it's too hot. There's always something, it's too this, it's too that. It should be like this, it should be like that. But this is just the voice of desire again, throwing up obstacles, stopping you actually understanding where your suffering is coming from. Because if you convince yourself not to meditate, not to practice mindfulness, then of course you won't really know what's going on. You're back to square one again, you're suffering, but you don't know why and you don't know what to do about it. Maybe if you get the attitude right, you start viewing it in the way of the Buddha, maybe you say, it's too hot. You say, good. now I can really understand suffering. Or my mind is too restless and I'm thinking too much. You could say, good, now I can really understand this. Now I can look and learn from what are the obstacles to meditation and insight. If I have pain in my leg, good, this is something I can learn from. I can see suffering arising, how I attach to the pain and react to it with negativity. You say, good. There's actually a monk in Thailand, they call Lumpur Good, Lumpur Di, which means good in Thai. Because his way of meditation is always looking to see the good in something. Good mean not necessarily always getting what you want, but seeing a good outcome, meaning getting some understanding, some insight from each situation, even when things go wrong. There's some good in there. If you look for it, you'll find it. So he said, when he was ill, he said, good, this is a chance I've got to learn about my attachment to my body. Because when you're ill, you notice the attachment to the body, the identification with the feelings of tiredness or pain or the discomfort. You can learn from that, and that's something good. So when he was ill, he'd say, good. Or when people forgot to bring food to the temple and he had to go without food, he said, good, now I can contemplate what hunger is like. When he was in the car going, somebody invited him out of the temple and the car broke down and he had to wait ages by the side of the road. He said, good, now I can practice meditation by the side of the road and I know what it's like when I'm late for an appointment. That was his way of keeping the right attitude to learn from his suffering. So even suffering has a good side to it in that you can learn from it. You can learn about desire, how desire causes you suffering. And it becomes interesting, like Ajahn Chah said, when suffering arises, if you understand how to practice, it can actually become interesting. Doesn't mean to say you have to look for suffering or want suffering and create it. Somehow to further your practice, you always seeking out suffering. But if it does arise, just take it as an opportunity to learn something. That's the good side of suffering. And it can become interesting. Why am I irritated? Why am I feeling sad? Why am I restless? Why am I feeling bored? There's a lesson to be learned there. That's the good side of suffering. Like someone today at the monastery, they're saying, it's really frustrating because they want to practice letting go of their anger. They're a meditator, they're Buddhist, they understand anger is suffering, they don't want anger. But it comes up so fast in their experience. When you get angry, it's like lightning. Somebody says something and you become angry instantly. Or something goes wrong, you become angry. Or you think of something you don't like and you're angry straight away. It's so fast. They're saying, how can I deal with this? I said, well, first of all, just take it as a challenge and something you've got to learn from. If you're getting angry easily and quickly in situations, there's a lesson to be learned there, isn't it? What's going on? Take an interest in it. Sure, at the moment you're angry, you may not be able to let go of it yet, solve it yet, but sometimes we have to review it. If you're angry, maybe you just go back and review afterwards. Why did I become angry there? What triggered it? What was the cause? When you're angry, what does it feel like? Do you like being angry? It's another lesson you can learn, isn't it? Nobody likes the feeling of anger, the tension, the physical tension, the mental stress. But you can learn from that rather than just be a victim of it. You say, what can I learn from this? When you manage to let go of your anger, or when it fades away, well, that's another lesson, isn't it? You can learn from that. Anger is impermanent. What's impermanent is not really a self. It's not really you. It's a condition of mind. It's a mood. It's a feeling, a thought that comes up, but then it passes away again. And that's another insight. There's a whole range of things you can learn about anger, how it's triggered, how to end it, what's its nature. Even though it's unpleasant in the experience, if you turn your attention to learn about it, quite often it quickly fades and you quickly gain some insight. But you have to maintain that attitude of wanting to learn. Even wanting to see, you might say, see the good side of anger, meaning it teaches you something. If it comes up really fast, why? Probably because it's a habit that you've built up over a long time. You let yourself get angry once, and then again, and then again, and then it will come up all the quicker and easier each time. Whereas if you start practicing some mindfulness, patience, investigating the Dhamma, developing some insight around the anger, you're doing the opposite. You're not giving in to your anger so easily. You're not indulging it, following it so much. Oh, well, it will come up slightly less often, and when it comes up, maybe it's a little weaker, and maybe your insight starts to gain pace, gain momentum, and so the next time you're angry, you know straight away, this is not self, this won't last. It may still arise due to the power of your karma. You've been angry 100 times before, well, you'll get angry again, but maybe not for very long. And sometimes it might not arise at all in a situation where you previously got angry. All you need is to be mindful of that once, and you realize, it's possible. You can abandon anger and it may not return. In that particular set of conditions, circumstances, I'm no longer getting angry. You've learned to see through it and understand whatever the trigger was, you've seen through it. And then you really gain a strong insight. Then you say, I can abandon anger. It can be let go of. But to get to that point, you've got to know it, haven't you? You've got to know anger, its beginning, its end, its trigger, its nature. Once you know something, that's all it is. It's just part of nature. It's not a person. If you really have some mindfulness insight into anger or any other kind of suffering, it's just a natural phenomena that arises due to its conditions, and then it passes away. It's not a person, a being. It's not really you, me, them. It's just a state of mind, or we say a condition of mind, a sankhara. It arises, it ceases. It's not self. It can be let go of. And you keep applying that insight over and over again, that insight will become clearer to you in so many different situations. Ajahn Chah actually said it becomes fun. When you take an interest in learning about suffering and how to overcome it, it becomes fun because everything is teaching you. The pleasant emotions and beautiful states of mind you can experience. The unpleasant emotions, the misery of life as well. Everything can teach you something, so it all becomes interesting, even becomes fun. Learning how you fall into suffering, but then also learning how to let go of suffering and overcome it. Perhaps that's a clue to the practice. If you're struggling with your meditation or your general Dhamma practice, see how you can get to the point where you take an interest in what's going on in your mind, however good or bad it is, and see if you can make it actually fun or enjoyable to contemplate these things. So maybe for today I'll just give you these reflections, and after this, if anyone has any questions, we'll try and answer them for you.